Malcolm and Simone Collins do the Based Camp podcast on YouTube. They've been outputting episodes 5 times a week for more than a year, so there's a lot to choose from. No one, to my knowledge, has yet done a 10 best episodes list for 2024, so it's easy for newcomers to be overwhelmed with the choices. This 2-part video explores my selection for their 10 best episodes for 2024, and those choices are based on a combo of how much they emotionally grabbed me, how strongly they reframed something or provided gifted insight, or how much they just cracked me up. All right, so let's get started.
Our friends about it?
It was from CPS. For people who aren't from the US, that's Child Protective Services. This is a government service that takes kids away from people when they're like abusing kids or something like that. Now, our initial thought when this happened to us is this must be like the pronatalist version of swatting someone, right?
Yes.
You know, we assumed it was like a random hater who just wanted to fuck with us, right? A lot of their complaints were actually true to the way we raise our kids, even in things that we don't air publicly. And so our fans may be like, no, you've aired enough of this publicly that I would have been able to guess all of this. But our actual read is we are experiencing what many Americans experience today, especially if they hang out with you know, any sort of, or adjacent to any sort of progressive circle that really has no understanding of what it's like to actually raise kids, where the rules for how you raise kids and how you should raise kids are being written by people who have no experience with child rearing and do not understand what's realistic and what's not.
And these rules don't correlate with like well-being, survival, health, like normal things. Like these are not, you know, we're not talking about rules like don't beat your children. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about why CPS was called on us, why they were interested in talking to us. Reason number 1. Our kids were wearing used clothing. Next point that they called us on. Our kids are very frequently sick.
No shit, Sherlock. They go to daycare.
Like, you have to, I can understand somebody who has never interacted with kids, never had to send kids to a daycare or something like that. Because right now our kids are in daycare. Being like, oh, it's weird how often these kids are sick, right? The next one was that our kids sleep alone.
Yeah.
They sleep in a room alone.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I mean, there are 2 cameras in the room.
And there are cameras in the room.
Yeah.
We live in a house from the 1700s, so we can hear everything they're saying in the room from our room. Not that I need to defend this. This is a normal thing that parents do after a certain age. Our youngest sleeps in Simone's room. You might think it's they let their kids interact with barnyard animals like chickens and dogs. No, it was actually that we have our kids play outside. Now, keep in mind, we have a kitchen. You guys have seen videos of the kitchen a lot. It's got views to our yard, but we let them play outside without us being there. And we lock the gates with coded lock that said that the kids can't open. But yeah, we let our kids play outside without us also outside. You know, so like actual bad things can come of this, right?
Yeah, so this call was legit scary. Legit scary.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was legit terrifying. And it is one of these things where you're like, oh my God, like this is not like a conservative fever dream of what's going on right now. This is real enough that it affected us. And it doesn't appear to have been a SWAT thing. It appears to have been like a neighbor or something had actual concerns that our kids were outside playing without us there. And I think you're right. Yeah, it's the same with child rearing. However, I think it's more than that. I think when people are talking about child rearing, they're not talking about like acceptable behavioral states. They're talking about imposing culture on other people. And I think that it's so easy to understate how insidious it is whenever somebody says that they have the right to raise somebody else's kids or the state has the right to raise somebody else's kids. And they just don't use those words. They don't use the words, the state should take your kids from you and be raising them because I disagree with your cultural practices.
Yeah, I mean, here's the bright side. It probably is going to be the case that Child Protective Services gets called on us several times, and it's better for us to get to know them now rather than later, because then at least they'll understand that people are just going to call them on us a lot, and I don't want them to waste their resources. I think they're doing really helpful work. I really worry about kids who don't have enough food, don't have enough clothing, don't have diapers. That is a real problem. They're doing really good work. So better that they know us now and understand that we're okay and we don't need help. And that our children are not wearing rags. They're wearing Ralph Lauren. It's just
they're
Ralph
used
Lauren.
Ralph Lauren. The horror, Simone. The horror.
That's the definition of stealth wealth.
That
and
is
money.
the definition of abuse. What we're going to do is go through, at least this day, and we'll see how it does, her diaries from when she first met me.
I was on a quest to fall in love and have my heart broken in 1 year. And okay, yeah, sex is part of that, but still.
Yeah, I think it's more. Yeah, but I hear you. So you were this person. So first talk about the quest and then get into your writing, starting with when you met me, I guess.
In 2012, I turned 24 years old, and I decided that in that year, my New Year's resolution, the big one, would be to fall in love and have my heart broken all in 1 year, because I intended to live alone forever. I intended to not have any kids, never get married. I really never encountered anyone who I could even stomach the idea of dating, the idea of someone associating themselves with me, even saying that we were dating, made me literally sick to my stomach. So I knew that marriage wasn't for me. Malcolm paid the check and said he wanted to show me something. We stepped outside and then basically walked right into the Four Seasons. I was just going with the flow at that point and wasn't pretty surprised when he demonstrated his aforementioned love of pushing boundaries and breaking rules by stepping into a subsidiary staircase leading up to a couple flights of stairs and pointing out that it's surprising how few doors are locked. We ended up in a hallway belonging to the business portion of the hotel. It was dimly lit. We stopped in the middle of the hallway, and I realized that this was totally one of his hilarious little tricks. Lo and behold, there he was, standing just about an inch from me. Yep. So of course we kissed, and then we kissed again, and then he pushed me against the wall, and we kissed even more, and we started kissing pretty deeply. I was surprised by how normal it felt. I recall saying something like, well, there goes that 5-year hiatus. He totally pulled every cliche move in the book, not just the leading me to a dark hallway thing, but also the slamming me against the wall thing, the unbuttoning my coat thing, the lifting me to the floor thing, the reaching up my dress thing. I kept laughing the whole time because it was so gamed, so scripted. Quote, "I totally see what you're doing," unquote, I said. Not that I stopped him. I really only drew the line when he started reaching for my nethers. But yeah, he definitely had a massive heart on. And I'm not going to pretend that he didn't totally turn me on. And I'm not going to pretend that I did not thoroughly enjoy making out with him. You had such a routine, and I knew it, but I think that's really interesting in that I think men who have routines typically hide them or try. Yeah. He said he used to have more of a need for sex and all that jazz. My words, not his. And it slowed down a bit because, and yes, he really did say this, he has learned the difference between good and bad masturbation.
As to what I meant by the masturbation comment, once you get really good at seducing women and you really no longer find it a challenge, so you can basically sleep with whoever you want, whenever you want, you'll soon realize that the only thing that gave sex value over masturbation was that it was difficult and high status. Maybe not everyone feels that way, but I think a lot of the population, if they were honest with themselves, would be like, yeah, sex is a ton of effort and masturbation is just easier outside of any bonding effects it has. And feels about as good. Because, I mean, of course, why wouldn't it? You couldn't literally choose every aspect of the experience for yourself and optimize it for whatever you're specifically interested in.
I grew up in the prison system. So at the age of 13, I was sent to court-appointed prison alternatives. If you have read the book Holes or seen the movie Holes, is a very good example of one of these camps. It was a private prison system for children that was related to the troubled teen industry, but it was like the court-appointed iteration of this. And from that age until college, I never lived with my parents again. And when I say this, they're always like, oh, that explains why. That explains so much.
Right. Oh, it's just his trauma. All of this is to deal with his trauma.
With trauma. And I'm like, well, no, you know, I don't, that's not really that relevant to my current world perspective. And they will not accept that answer. You've seen this. They just refuse to. You can see that they're like, oh, yes, little traumatized child. I see you, you know, acting tough, but that's only because of the trauma. And I'm like, no, culturally, I was taught that this isn't the way you relate to what's hard in your life because, you know, worst case scenario, you create this rags to riches narrative, which is really plausible. Like it's one I could really indulge in. But if I'm being honest, my parents were both really smart people. And for generations, my family has had a very easy time making money. And I inherited that. And yes, I may not have inherited wealth directly or inherited their social circles or connections directly, but I did inherit the capability of life not being that hard for me, just from a mental perspective. And negative nature of the events. In these moments growing up, these bad things happen. Simone was talking about a few times people tried to kill me. I starved at times. I had to eat ants to not die. I had to learn what insects I could eat in the area, what plants I could eat. It was hard because I was allergic to something they were using in the foods that they were giving to the kids and they didn't believe me. And so, yeah, so a lot of stuff happened, but I just saw it all as an interesting challenge. Like that was genuinely the way I engaged with it. I was like, oh, this is a really interesting challenge. I suppose this isn't the way a lot of people engage with things like this that happen to them in life. And we had done another video on this on the Jordan Peterson raising kids thing. And we're like, we really disagree with his parenting strategies because they are focused on breaking the child's will and getting them to obey authority. Whereas ours are focused on stoking a child's will and getting them to resist authority and even gain like emotional fire and happiness from the moments where they successfully resist an unjust authority. I would encourage other people to consider is stoking their will and internal locus of control and sort of desire to know what's right for themselves and fight for that.
Did your parents do that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my mom told me, oh, they don't care what the teachers say. They're idiots. They're losers. You know, well, that's not something a lot of parents would say, you know.
This thing that's running against me, like, I just can't do it.
Yeah, they start by telling us their narratives.
Yeah, like we're seeing a lot of like learned helplessness or like determined, what's the word, fatalism. And like, well, I'm just not going to try because there's no point.
And I get that narratives are difficult to break.
Yes.
But if you're starting with one of these narratives and you realize yourself as having one, the most important thing is to change your friend group and change where you're living and change what you're doing every day. If you change your environment, and you go into this new environment like dead set, okay, well, now I'm going to live this like trad conservative lifestyle and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be industrious. The amount to which you can change as a person is really difficult to oversell. By that, what I mean is all trauma is really just due to these sorts of contextualizations. And no matter what happens to you, the things that happen to you aren't what create the trauma. It's the way your community and yourself choose to relate to those things. And that's the point to all of this. This was an incredibly talented actor, a diligent individual who understood the new social contract of the internet and used it to make enough money that he never needed to do anything again by playing the fat kid. by playing the kid who everyone picked on.
Oh, it's
But
so
it was
sad.
an act designed for this modern audience, this modern disintermediate. How is it? It's better than the alternative.
And I think it's pretty clear that he is playing a character in the same way that like Ali G is a character. It's just that this character, instead of being designed to make us laugh, is designed to masturbate the feelings that we get from the type of, fat kid we would have made fun of in school, but presenting an super normal stimuli version of that fat kid. Nick Avocado was to the emotions that fat kid in school that people picked on. And I'm not saying everybody did this, but like obviously there's a portion of the population that has an impulse to pick on the fat kid at school. He fulfills that impulse for that portion of the population as a supernormal stimuli in the same way that the super hot porn star fulfills that stimulus when contrasted with the cheerleader or whatever, the attractive girl that you had a crush on at your local school. The porn star is likely even more attractive than the real life person that you had a crush on because everyone can consume her, sexually speaking, at once. In the same way, everyone can at once pick on this Nick Avocado character. And again, remember when you're watching this clip, study, is this somebody acting or is this his real emotional state?
It's fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna start tomorrow. I'm gonna, and you can look at somebody like us and people can be like, well, I mean, does that mean that you are a character in the way that you're portraying yourself? And it's like, well, it's sort of. I mean, I've chosen a character to be my identity and I live as that character because I think it's optimized for achieving my particular goals in the world.
Mhm.
But I don't differentiate myself terribly from that character, which we've talked about in other videos, I think is why we have a good relationship with our fans. The point of all of this from the perspective of the audience is remember that in this age of disintermediated parasocial relationships, one in a big part, and I would commit this to other creators, the relationships you have with your audience, the fact that it's parasocial doesn't mean it's not real. Okay. You have chosen to play a social role within their lives, and it's important that you own the role that you have chosen to play, right? And you don't have animosity at them for viewing you the way you have sold yourself to them. My one day a year when I'm allowed to praise my wife on our anniversary of how long have we been together now? 12 years?
12 years.
The one day a year when I'm allowed to praise my wife, all these gushy posts I've posted about her. And I am going to read them to you, and she is going to comment on them. How can a person with such self-control exist? For decades, she has been living an existence in which every moment she was alive was lovingly crafted to be the perfect sacrifice to the incremental march of humanity. How can a person live life like that? How could a person with such self-control and such lucidity display such constant admiration of a wacko like me? Yeah. I love that there's this idea of codependency, right? As being this terrible thing. It's like, no, I'm definitely codependent on my wife. I could not emotionally exist without you anymore. I completely rely on you. I am completely leaning against you. We are back to back against a hostile world. And I don't protect my back at all. If you turned around and stabbed me, I wouldn't see it coming.
Yeah, well, except probably you would because you can actually model people. And I wouldn't because there have been multiple times where you've tried to surprise me with things and been utterly successful despite many close calls.
So one time when I really had to lie to her a lot was when I had the engagement ring and I was hiding it so that she wouldn't find it. She lacks a single suspicious bone in her body. The things that we had to do to get this engagement ring to her were just so obvious Like
It wasn't obvious to me at all. It was
my brother gave me a sock at a meal that we had to like go through a parade to get. So like, remember, it was like incredibly hard to meet him for this meal.
Yeah.
And then I'm carrying a single sock back to the car. Why? Why
Because
was I doing this?
I don't know. You freaking leave. I was like, this is very consistent. You leave clothes all over the place. It wouldn't surprise me at all that you might have left a sock at their place. So I just assumed he was returning your sock. There was nothing weird about that to me. I think you guys were way more subtle about it than you.
It's harder than usual in this episode to isolate a few moments and highlight them, but I will mention two key features that make this episode a standout. One, in the final 10 to 12 minutes of the original video from which this clip was taken, which Simone calls a cringe fest, it's an incredibly open, raw, vulnerable, personal outpouring from both Malcolm and Simone on how they feel about each other in a way that you rarely or never find married couples having this combo of playful banter and spontaneous vulnerability in public. Two, they include a short video segment in which Malcolm first proposed to Simone in private. He concealed a camera in the room so as to capture the images and sounds. It is so intimate and personal that I actually have mixed feelings personally that this material is available to the public. Should something that personal be available for public consumption? I don't know. There's a separate video that they did, a recent one in 2025, so it's not eligible for this top 10 list, which is supposed to cover 2024. And in this more recent video, there's a moment when Malcolm spontaneously asks Simone if he is more or less hot to her than when they were first married. And as if that wasn't jaw-dropping enough, she then proceeds to give him a nuanced, honest answer along the lines of, well, it's sort of a wash because you went down on this metric, but you went up on that one. I ask you, have you ever encountered a couple having that level of comfort between them? That level of radical honesty? Well, that wraps up part 1. I plan to have part 2 ready for upload sometime during the next 7 days. Thanks for watching.